There comes a moment in life, quiet, almost imperceptible, when the weight of everything you've been striving for suddenly feels absurd. You sit in traffic after a long day, or scroll endlessly through curated lives online, and a strange thought flickers in your mind. Why do I care so much about all of this? Not out of apathy, but out of exhaustion. That strange exhaustion of chasing approval, success, perfection, or even clarity. And then something shifts. You is not that you stop caring about life. It's that you stop caring about what you were told to care about. You stop obsessing over how you're perceived. You stop twisting yourself into shapes to fit someone else's expectations. And in that release, in that small rebellion against the noise, something unexpected happens. Things begin to fall into place. Not because you gained control, but because you let go of the illusion that you ever had it. This isn't just a modern burnout story. It's not another self-help soundbite. The paradox of detachment leading to clarity, of not caring leading to peace, has been observed for centuries. And one of the earliest and most eloquent voices on this matter was a man named Michel de Montaigne. Living in 16th century France, Montaigne was a nobleman, a public official, and most famously the father of the modern personal essay. But beyond his accolades, he was a man tormented by anxiety, self-doubt, and the unpredictable chaos of life. After a close friend's death and a brush with mortality, he retreated into his tower library, not to escape life, but to examine it. And there, within stone walls and shelves of ancient texts, he began writing about things philosophers often avoided: his bowel movements, his irrational fears, his social awkwardness. He wrote not as a sage with answers, but as a flawed human being trying to understand what it means to live authentically. And at the core of his philosophy was this radical idea that by caring less about external judgments, we return to our inner balance. This video is not a call to indifference. It is an invitation to examine what happens when we stop outsourcing our worth, when we stop caring so much about the things that keep us stuck. Through the lens of Montaigne's life and modern psychology, we'll explore how this subtle shift in mindset, this sacred detachment, can change everything, from self-doubt to confidence, chaos to clarity, fear to freedom. So take a breath. Let's begin. What does it truly mean to stop caring? It's easy to confuse this idea with resignation or numbness. In a world that glorifies hustle, passion, and performance, to stop caring seems almost sacrilegious, as if one is giving up. But that's not what we're talking about. When we say stop caring, we mean something far more nuanced. We mean letting go of the compulsive need to control outcomes, to be liked, to always succeed, or to be certain. It is the radical act of detaching from the noise, both outside and within, that tells you what matters, without asking whether it should matter at all. This is where Michel de Montaigne enters the story, not as a cold philosopher removed from daily life, but as a deeply vulnerable observer of it. Born in 1533, Montaigne lived through an era soaked in political instability, religious wars, and intellectual revolution. His France was a place of brutality, betrayal, and shifting allegiances. He saw the absurdity of people killing each other over ideas they barely understood, of powerful men pretending to possess wisdom while privately trembling with fear. He served in government, sat in judgment, and saw firsthand how easily people compromise their integrity for reputation. Eventually, disillusioned and weary, he stepped away from public life and turned inward. But his retreat wasn't a withdrawal from responsibility. It was a journey toward a more honest kind of engagement with the self. He began writing a collection of personal essays, candid meditations on everything from friendship and death to idleness and vanity. These essays weren't polished treatises. They were raw, unfiltered reflections that questioned the very foundations of what people cared about. At a time when philosophers were still obsessed with grand systems and rigid morality, Montaigne wrote about being terrified of doctors, of forgetting people's names, of how inconsistent his thoughts were from day to day. He refused to play the role of the wise man. Instead, he asked, "Why do we care so much about appearances? About being right? About never being seen as weak or foolish?" He once wrote that our great and glorious masterpiece is to live properly, not to conquer the world, not to be perfect, but to live honestly and attentively. And to do that, he believed we must drop the mask. We must dare to stop performing. This perspective wasn't born in a vacuum. Montaigne was heavily influenced by the ancient skeptics and Stoics, especially thinkers like Pyrrho, Epictetus, and Seneca, who argued that much of our suffering comes from mistaken attachments. The Stoics taught that we cannot control external events, only our reactions to them. They warned against being slaves to public opinion, praise, or wealth. But while the Stoics leaned toward a stern discipline, Montaigne added something more tender: self-forgiveness. He allowed room for contradiction. Where Epictetus might teach restraint, Montaigne taught acceptance. Where Marcus Aurelius strove for godlike virtue, Montaigne embraced his humanity in full. This humanistic, almost psychological approach to detachment set him apart. It wasn't about becoming invulnerable. It was about no longer being controlled by illusions. He challenged the idea that caring deeply about what others think is a moral necessity. Instead, he argued it was a kind of self-imprisonment. Yet his idea of not caring was never nihilistic. It wasn't about giving up on meaning, but about creating your own. Montaigne didn't renounce society. He remained part of it. He didn't dismiss relationships. He cherished his closest friendships. He simply refused to center his life around fear-based caring, of chasing reputation, status, or certainty at the cost of his inner peace. What's striking is how this philosophy echoes across time, culture, and tradition. In Buddhist thought, for instance, the concept of non-attachment has long been considered a path to liberation. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from craving, from clinging too tightly to people, outcomes, and identities. By loosening this grip, we don't love less, we love more freely. We don't stop trying, we simply stop forcing. Like Montaigne, Buddhism doesn't preach apathy. It encourages a deeper presence unclouded by ego. In Taoism, too, we find this gentle letting go. The Tao Te Ching reminds us that when we try to dominate life, it slips through our fingers. But when we yield, when we flow like water, we often arrive exactly where we need to be. Laozi taught that those who cling to control lose their balance. Those who trust the unfolding of life, however uncertain, walk in harmony. And in Sufi mysticism, there is an entire tradition of embracing divine indifference, a sacred release from worldly concern, not as neglect, but as devotion to something deeper. Rumi writes of burning the maps drawn by others, of becoming lost in the heart to finally be found. Across all these traditions, the message is clear. When you stop caring in the wrong way, you begin to care in the right way. Yet today, this message feels more relevant than ever. We live in a time where our value is often measured by algorithms. Likes, shares, comments, where opinions are currency and where outrage is performance. It's easy to become hyper-aware of how we appear, to over-edit our personalities in the hope of belonging. But in doing so, we risk losing touch with the quiet, grounded core of who we really are. We care too much about what strangers think, about whether we're being productive enough, whether we're falling behind, whether we're enough, period. And ironically, this desperate caring makes us less present, less joyful, less real. We become fragmented, part human, part brand. But what if we took a page from Montaigne? What if we dared to be flawed, uncertain, unpolished, and still worthy? What if we trusted that when we let go of external pressures, we make room for something more organic to emerge? Because here's the paradox Montaigne discovered and lived by. When we stop caring so much about how you're seen, we begin to see ourselves clearly, and when we stop clinging to every opinion or outcome, we create the space where life can flow, not perfectly but honestly. This shift, as subtle as it may seem, isn't just a philosophical one. It is a profound return to center, a homecoming to a self that never needed to perform in the first place. To understand why letting go, stopping caring, can be so transformational, we need to explore what happens inside us when we care too much. Not in the generous, loving way, but in the anxious, ego-driven way. The kind of caring that feels like clinging, that drains instead of nourishes. Modern psychology has a name for this kind of pattern: external validation dependency. It's the tendency to derive your self-worth from what others think, feel, or say about you. It starts early, perhaps in childhood, where love was conditional on behavior, or in school, where grades and praise defined value. Over time, we internalize a rule: I am only okay if others approve of me, and so we care. We care so deeply about being liked, chosen, respected, admired. We overthink texts, chase after jobs that don't fulfill us, smile when we want to cry, say yes when we mean no. We become experts at reading a room, but strangers to ourselves. Psychologist Carl Rogers once described this tension between the true self and the social self. The true self is the raw, unfiltered experience of who we are, our emotions, desires, values. The social self is the persona we shape to gain acceptance. The more we prioritize the social self, the more alienated we become from our own truth. Eventually, we can't tell where performance ends and person begins. Michel de Montaigne intuitively understood this split. He sensed the suffering that comes from living too much in the eyes of others. In one of his essays, he wrote that no wind is favorable to the sailor who doesn't know where to go. And perhaps that is the great tragedy of compulsive caring. We're always adjusting our sails, but never choosing our direction. This is where psychology meets ancient wisdom. Carl Jung took Rogers' ideas further with his concept of individuation, the process of integrating the various parts of ourselves, especially the ones we repress or hide, to become whole. Individuation requires that we face our shadow, the parts of us we deny because they don't fit the image we want to project. But if we care too much about maintaining that image, we never allow the shadow in. We never become whole. We remain fragmented, performing a role instead of living a life. This is why caring less is not apathy. It's courage. It's the courage to stop managing impressions and start integrating your truth. Jung believed that wholeness, not perfection, is the goal of life, and that requires stepping out of the performance. Neuroscience supports this too. When we constantly worry about how we're perceived, our brains activate the default mode network, a system associated with self-referential thinking. This is the part of the brain that creates our inner narrator, the one that says, "Did I say the wrong thing? Do they like me? Am I good enough?" When overactive, this network is linked to anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. But when we're present, when we let go, when we're not caught in managing others' impressions, activity in the default mode network decreases. We become more mindful, more in flow. We experience what psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi called flow state, where we lose ourselves in the moment and, paradoxically, find a deeper self in the process. And here's another paradox. Studies show that people who care less about approval tend to be more respected and trusted. This is the pratfall effect. People are more likable when they are competent, but also show vulnerability. Think of someone who's honest about their mistakes, who doesn't pretend to have all the answers. Their lack of pretense makes them relatable, even magnetic. When Montaigne wrote about his awkwardness or his fear of death, he didn't diminish himself. He became more human. And in doing so, he gave readers permission to be human too. This is deeply connected to authenticity theory in psychology, which suggests that when our actions align with our inner values, we feel more alive, more confident, and more resilient. But authenticity requires discernment. We have to know what matters to us, not just what we've been told to care about. One of the great distortions of modern culture is the belief that if we just cared more, worked harder, optimized further, hustled longer, we'd finally be enough. But often, the opposite is true. It's not the intensity of effort, but the quality of awareness that changes things. There's an old Sufi teaching. You think because you try so hard, the door will open. But the door only opens when you stop banging on it. The trying is important, yes, but it must be paired with release, with trust. This doesn't mean abandoning ambition or passion. It means anchoring them in intrinsic motivation, the inner compass of meaning and joy, rather than external validation. When we act from a place of intrinsic motivation, we're not chasing outcomes to prove something. We're creating, working, living because it resonates with who we are. And ironically, when we stop caring so much about how it looks, we often create our best work. We connect more deeply. We lead more authentically. Take leadership as an example. Studies show that the most effective leaders are not the most dominant or polished, but the most emotionally intelligent. The ones who can hold space, admit when they're wrong, and lead without needing constant approval. That kind of grounded presence is born from detachment, not from indifference but from a lack of ego. There's also a social dimension to all of this. Sociologist Irving Goffman wrote about the idea of face work, how we constantly managing impressions in our social interactions, like actors on a stage. Social media has amplified this. Now we curate not just conversations, but entire identities. We perform wellness, intelligence, confidence, happiness, but behind the scenes, many of us feel the dissonance, the exhaustion. Stopping caring, then, becomes an act of social resistance, a refusal to participate in the endless performance of curated perfection, a return to something more organic. Montaigne wasn't on Instagram, but if he were, he'd probably post a blurry picture of his desk, write a caption about feeling lost, and then go read a book about Roman philosophy. Not to impress, but because that's what his soul needed. And here's something tender, maybe even painful. Many of us don't know what our soul needs, because we've been so busy caring about what everyone else thinks it should need. We've become so used to proving our worth that we've forgotten we were born worthy. That's the real heartbreak of over-caring. Not that we work too hard, but that we forget why we started. Not that we want love, but that we seek it in places that will never truly see us. And not that we want meaning, but that we chase it in noise instead of silence. When Montaigne wrote, he often paused mid-thought to question himself. He'd contradict something he wrote a few pages earlier. He didn't seek consistency. He sought honesty. In a world that demands certainty, that's a revolutionary act. So, the next time you find yourself overthinking a conversation, worrying about your next move, or doubting your worth based on someone else's reaction, pause. Ask yourself, am I living from fear or from freedom? Because while caring is human, how we care makes all the difference. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for your sanity, your relationships, your creativity, is to simply let go. One of the most difficult truths to accept, especially in a world obsessed with optimization, is that control is often an illusion, and yet so much of our suffering stems from trying to control the uncontrollable. We try to curate every interaction, manage every impression, predict every outcome. We micromanage our lives into exhaustion, and then wonder why we still feel out of alignment. Michel de Montaigne, centuries before Instagram algorithms and hustle culture, understood this paradox intimately. He wrote not just about philosophy, but about digestion, dreams, friendship, fear, the body, grief, habit. Nothing was too small or too personal for him to examine. Because to Montaigne, the most honest kind of wisdom begins in the body, in the mess of living. He wasn't trying to build an empire of ideas. He was trying to let go of the need to be anything other than fully human. Modern psychology now echoes this wisdom. In therapeutic practices like ACT, acceptance, and commitment therapy, we learn that psychological flexibility is far more powerful than rigid control, that the more we try to suppress our anxiety, the more it owns us, that the more we chase happiness, the more we fear its loss. The more we grip life tightly, the more it slips through our fingers. In a way, Montaigne practiced his own version of ACT centuries before it existed. Instead of trying to conquer fear, he examined it. Instead of trying to silence discomfort, he sat with it. And in doing so, he found something surprising. When you stop resisting life, life stops resisting you. There is a beautiful metaphor from Taoist philosophy that complements Montaigne's view, the idea of being like water. Water does not force, it does not fight. It flows around obstacles, it adapts, it yields, and yet it carves through mountains. When you stop caring so much about control, about appearances, about how every little thing is perceived, you become like water, soft but unbreakable, fluid but powerful, and, most importantly, free. Let's pause here. How often do you feel the need to manage everything? Your time, your image, your relationships, because you're afraid that letting go means failure, rejection, or chaos. We're conditioned to believe that effort equals worth, that productivity equals value, that anxiety is just the price of achievement. But this mindset turns us into performers of life rather than participants in it. Montaigne didn't live that way, and neither must we. There's a deeper kind of freedom, one that begins not when you get everything under control, but when you start caring more intentionally and selectively. You begin to care only about what's yours to carry. Not every opinion, not every outcome, not every emotion someone tries to hand you. This is what modern psychologists call emotional boundaries, and Montaigne would have simply called it common sense. In his essays, he often reminded readers that no one is inside your head but you, and that your peace depends not on what happens, but on how you meet it. But let's be honest, this doesn't come naturally. We are biologically wired to seek connection, to fear rejection, to crave approval. Our ancient nervous system doesn't differentiate between being disliked on social media and being exiled from a tribe in the wild. So, when Montaigne says, "It is not death that alarms me, but dying," he's not being dramatic. He's pointing to something primal, our terror of losing control, especially in the eyes of others. This is where modern life collides with ancient wisdom. We now have more tools than ever: therapy, mindfulness, neuroscience, spiritual practices. But the goal remains the same as it was in Montaigne's time: to live well without becoming a slave to fear or ego. To reach that goal, we need to redefine what caring means. To care deeply doesn't mean to cling tightly. To be committed doesn't mean to be consumed. To be present doesn't mean to be performative. Montaigne believed in caring where it counts, in friendship, in the cultivation of character, in the pleasure of being alive for its own sake, not as a means to an end. He reminds us that sometimes the best way to heal is to stop trying so hard to fix, to stop treating your life like a project and start treating it like a relationship. And in a relationship, what matters most is attention, not control, not performance, just attention. Attention to your body's rhythms. Attention to what genuinely nourishes you. Attention to the people and places that make you feel like yourself again. Letting go, then, is not apathy. It's the highest form of engagement. It says, "I trust life enough not to strangle it." There's a story about a Zen master who held a cup in the palm of his hand and said, "This cup is already broken," not because it was damaged, but because he understood its impermanence. He loved it anyway, precisely because it would not last. This is what Montaigne grasped about life, about love, about control. Everything is already broken. already changing, already slipping through your grasp. And when you accept that, not as a tragedy, but as a truth, everything begins to fall into place. Because you stop trying to hold what was never yours to hold. You stop exhausting yourself trying to hold the wind. And finally, you can rest. So perhaps the most powerful question you can ask today is not, how can I care more? But rather, where am I caring too much about things that don't matter? What could fall into place if I just let go? There's a quiet devastation that comes from caring too much. Not the care born from love, empathy, or service, but the kind that turns you into a mirror, constantly reflecting what others want to see. Over time, this form of excessive caring eats away at identity, dilutes purpose, and makes life feel like a series of obligations rather than a canvas of possibility. The impact of this is profound, psychologically, emotionally, socially, even physically. Let's start with identity. When we overcare, we blur the lines between who we are and who we think we should be. This creates a fractured self, a life of edits. We say yes to roles that don't align with our values, we pursue goals that were never truly ours, and we measure success by standards we didn't create. This fragmentation leads to chronic self-doubt, the kind that whispers at night, "Am I really living my life, or someone else's idea of it?" And here's the tragedy. Many people only realize this after years of burnout, betrayal, or loss, when the mask breaks, when the approval they worked so hard to earn no longer satisfies, when they find themselves surrounded by people who know the mask, but not the soul beneath it. This is not just a personal crisis, it's a spiritual one. Because when you care too much about being accepted, you abandon the sacred responsibility of self-honoring. You trade truth for applause. And applause, like any drug, only satisfies for a moment. Then the emptiness returns. This kind of over-caring also warps our relationships. Think of the friend who always says what you want to hear, never what you need to hear. Or the partner who molds themselves into your ideal until one day they erupt in resentment. Relationships built on pleasing are fragile. They lack the honest friction that deep connection requires. People who care too much in this way often become emotional contortionists, twisting themselves to meet others' needs while ignoring their own. This leads to codependency, a psychological pattern where one's sense of worth is tied to being needed, liked, or indispensable. At first, it feels like love, but over time, it becomes a prison. The fear of being disliked becomes stronger than the desire to be authentic. This was something Montaigne saw with clarity. He wrote that we are great fools to imagine the world judges us by our interior qualities. It always judges by appearances. But he didn't say this to shame us. He said it to free us. He was pointing out the absurdity of the game so we could stop playing it. When we care too much about appearances, our inner world suffers. Anxiety, perfectionism, imposter syndrome, all of these thrive in the soil of overcaring. We become hypervigilant, scanning for signs of rejection. Every silence becomes a judgment. Every disagreement, a personal attack. Our nervous systems pay the price. Cortisol levels spike. Sleep is disrupted. The body, unable to distinguish between physical threat and social threat, stays in fight or flight mode. And all of this just to maintain an image that doesn't even belong to us. Now, let's shift to work and career. The modern workplace, especially in competitive fields, often rewards performance over authenticity. The unspoken rule is clear: be liked, be agreeable, be endlessly available. But this creates what psychologists call emotional labor, the act of managing feelings to meet external expectations. If you've ever smiled through exhaustion, agreed in a meeting while biting your tongue, or apologized just to keep the peace, you've done emotional labor. And while sometimes it's necessary, over time it erodes your sense of agency. It creates resentment, disengagement, and burnout. The World Health Organization has even classified burnout as an occupational phenomenon. And one of its key causes? A mismatch between effort and recognition, between how much you care and how much that caring is actually valued. When people give too much of themselves, with too little return, something starts to die inside. Not all at once. Quietly. Over time. There's a reason people fantasize about disappearing, about starting over in a cabin in the woods or a small town where no one knows their name. It's not because they don't want connection. It is because they re-starving for a version of life where they can just be, without the weight of performance. But this desire, to be seen, known, valued as you are, isn't foolish. It's ancient. It shows up in myths, in literature, in every culture. In ancient Greek tragedy, there's the concept of hubris, excessive pride, or over-identification with an image of power or perfection. The hero believes they are untouchable, but their downfall always comes not from weakness, but from the refusal to accept limits, to let go. There's a parallel here. When we care too much about reputation, perfection, performance, we become like the tragic hero. We believe if we just hold on tighter, we'll be safe. But safety doesn't come from control. It comes from congruence, from aligning with what's real. History gives us many cautionary tales. Take Tiberius, the Roman emperor who was so obsessed with appearances and control that he withdrew from public life entirely, retreating to an island fortress. He ruled from the shadows, paranoid and isolated. In trying to protect his image, he lost himself. Or think of modern celebrities who, after years of shaping their persona, speak of loneliness, of feeling unknown, even as millions adore them. Montaigne saw the seeds of this in his own time. In one essay, he writes about people who make their whole life a mask, warning that when the performance never stops, the self dissolves. But the consequences aren't always dramatic. Often they're quiet. The young woman who doesn't apply for a job she wants because she fears rejection. The man who stays in a relationship he has outgrown because he can bear the guilt. The artist who never finishes their work because it might not be perfect. In each of these cases, a life shrinks, not because of lack of talent or opportunity, but because of the weight of overcaring. And perhaps the cruelest part is this: no matter how perfectly you perform, someone will still misunderstand you, dislike you, dismiss you. Approval is a moving target. You could chase it your whole life and still feel unworthy. So what happens when you stop chasing? When you stop caring so much? The opposite of collapse is not chaos. It's clarity. When you stop caring what everyone thinks, you start to hear your own voice again. You make decisions from alignment, not fear. You connect from truth, not obligation. You create from joy, not pressure. You reclaim the energy that was spent overthinking, pleasing, and second-guessing. You realize that peace doesn't come from control. It comes from coherence, from living a life that makes sense to you even if it doesn't make sense to everyone else. The consequences of not stopping, of caring too much for too long, are steep: anxiety, burnout, loneliness, regret. But the consequences of caring just enough, of being intentional, grounded, and self-connected, are beautiful: freedom, presence, integrity, real joy. Montaigne's genius was not in discovering something new, but in reminding us of something ancient, that the soul does not need to be admired, it needs to be expressed, that you don't need to be loved by everyone, you need to love yourself enough to be fully alive. So, what now? What do you actually do when you've realized you care too much about being liked, being right, being perfect? How do you shift from a life of emotional overinvestment to one of grounded, peaceful detachment? Montaigne offers us a strange kind of wisdom. He doesn't shout answers. He wanders through questions. He invites us to observe, to notice, to sit with our contradictions rather than fix them. His philosophy is not about achieving peace through control, but through release, and that is where we begin. 1. The first step: radical self-honesty. You can't stop caring until you admit what you're caring about and why. So start with the question most people avoid. Who am I performing for? Is it your parents, your partner, society, social media, an internal critic who never seems satisfied? This isn't about blame. It's about clarity. Journaling can be a powerful tool here. Write a list of everything you're currently worried about. Then, next to each item, write who you think would be disappointed if you let it go. Often, you'll find that the pressure you're carrying doesn't even belong to you. Montaigne believed that most of our inner turmoil comes from not knowing ourselves, not because we're incapable, but because we're afraid of what we'll find. But, paradoxically, when you confront those parts of yourself, your fears, your motives, you start to relax, because now you're grounded in truth, not illusion. 2. Practice emotional discernment. Not everything deserves your energy. Modern psychology teaches this through cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. One core CBT principle is recognizing distorted thinking, especially personalization and mind reading. If someone doesn't text you back, you assume they're mad. If your work isn't praised, you assume you've failed. These assumptions lead to overcaring. They flood your nervous system with unnecessary stress. Instead, pause. Ask, is this true? Or is this a story I'm telling myself? The Stoics practiced a similar mental habit. They called it the dichotomy of control. Epictetus taught that some things are within your power, your thoughts, your actions, and most things aren't. So focus only on what is yours to carry. This isn't indifference, it's discernment. It's caring where it counts. 3. The art of letting go without apathy. Many fear that if they stop caring, they'll become cold, selfish, or disconnected. But detachment doesn't mean detachment from people. It means detachment from the outcome you can control. In Buddhism, this is called non-attachment. You give fully, you love deeply, but you do not cling. You allow space for others to choose, grow, disappoint you, even leave. And in that space, you find peace. Try this meditation practice. Sit quietly for 5 minutes. Breathe in and say, I allow things to unfold. Breathe out and say, I release the need to control. Repeat. It sounds simple, even cliché. But over time, these micro-shifts rewire your nervous system. You begin to live in response, not reactivity. 4. Reconnect with your enoughness. Caring too much often comes from a place of not feeling enough. So, healing begins with rebuilding a grounded self-worth, not one based on performance, approval, or comparison. Ask yourself, what if I stopped trying to earn love and simply received it? This is where self-compassion comes in. Dr. Kristin Neff, a leading researcher on self-compassion, identifies 3 components. Mindfulness. Be aware of your suffering without exaggerating it. Common humanity. Remember that you are not alone in your struggle. Self-kindness. Talk to yourself like you would to a dear friend. This practice changes everything. Because once you believe you are enough, you no longer overgive to prove it. You no longer shrink to be accepted. You begin to live honestly, because you are no longer negotiating for worth. 5. Build an internal compass. Montaigne didn't rely on public opinion to guide his life. He created his own compass, based on values, experience, and deep introspection. You can do the same. Write down 5 values that truly matter to you, not what looks good on paper, but what feels right in your bones. Maybe it's honesty, or depth, or simplicity, or joy. Then ask, are my current choices aligned with these values? Use this as a daily filter. If something goes against your values, it's probably not worth the emotional investment. This is how you stop chasing and start choosing. 6. Reclaim boundaries. Without guilt, caring too much often erodes boundaries. You say yes when you mean no. You overextend. You explain too much. You apologize for existing. It's time to unlearn this. Start small. Practice saying no without justifying. Instead of, "I'm sorry, I just have so much going on," say, "I won't be able to make it, but I hope it goes well." At first, it will feel uncomfortable. You might feel selfish, but that's not selfishness. It's self-respect growing new roots. Remember, Montaigne withdrew from political life not because he was apathetic, but because he realized his energy was better spent in reflection, in writing, in living with integrity. His boundary wasn't a wall. It was a doorway into a more authentic existence. Yervin. Reframe your role in relationships. Healthy connection is not built on over-caring. It's built on interdependence. This means being whole on your own, while choosing to share life with others. Instead of asking, "What do they need me to be?" try asking, "Can I be fully myself here?" This shift changes how you show up. You become more honest, more present, more rooted, and ironically, the less you try to please, the more authentic your relationships become. 8. Integrate rituals of self-returning. Create daily or weekly rituals that help you return to yourself. These could be a solo walk without your phone. Journaling one question. Where did I abandon myself today? Reading Montaigne or a favorite philosopher, not for productivity but for soul nourishment. Practicing silence, even 10 minutes a day without noise, input, or expectation. These rituals aren't luxuries. They are lifelines. They remind you that your life belongs to you. 9. Understand, this is a process, not a switch. You won't stop caring overnight. You'll still get triggered. You'll still catch yourself overthinking, people-pleasing, comparing. But the goal isn't to become indifferent. The goal is to become so full of presence and self-awareness that external noise no longer runs your life. Every time you pause instead of react. Every time you say no when it's hard. Every time you trust your instincts. You are rewiring your inner world. You are becoming less reactive, more resilient, and more real. 10. Embrace the mystery. Montaigne understood the limits of control. He knew that the mind wants answers, certainty, resolution. But life is not a puzzle to be solved, it is a paradox to be lived. So allow space for the unknown. Let go of needing everything to make sense. Sometimes the most powerful act of not caring is trusting that what is meant for you will find you, and what leaves you was never yours to begin with. In the end, this isn't about not caring. It's about caring more wisely. Less about image, more about essence. Less about being liked, more about being real. Less about performing, more about participating, fully, freely, and with heart. When you stop caring, everything falls into place. It sounds like a paradox, because it is. But it's one that Montaigne lived, and one that modern psychology now affirms. The secret isn't that you stop caring altogether. The secret is that you stop over-caring about what drains you, defines you, or distorts your peace. This is not a path of indifference. It's a return to discernment. You still care, but with boundaries, with grace, with inner alignment. When Michel de Montaigne retreated to his tower to write his essays, he wasn't escaping life. He was re-entering it from the inside out. He knew that public opinion was fickle, that external validation was a hollow currency, that in the end the only true wisdom came from listening, not to the crowd, but to the quiet voice within. He wrote not to teach others, but to understand himself. And in that act of raw self-exploration, he found a strange kind of freedom. A life no longer ruled by appearances or performances, but by authenticity. A life where he could grieve honestly, love imperfectly, question everything, and still sleep well at night. What Montaigne teaches us is that peace isn't found in control. It's found in letting go of needing to be understood by everyone, letting go of timelines, of comparison, of the chase for constant improvement, letting go of the illusion that you must always be progressing, winning, becoming. Because when you let go, you return to yourself, to this moment, to the rhythm of your own breath. Think about how much of your life is shaped by subtle anxieties, the pressure to be liked, to respond quickly, to always be available, to say the right thing, to achieve more, to never disappoint. This is the trap of modern hypercare. It wears the mask of ambition or kindness, but underneath it's often fear. But when you stop overcaring, something beautiful happens. You stop grasping, and you start receiving. You stop clinging, and you start experiencing. The people who are meant to stay, stay. The ideas that matter rise to the surface. The version of you that is real begins to speak louder than the one you've curated. This is how everything starts to fall into place. Not because you forced it, but because you finally allowed life to move with you, not just through you. This path requires courage. It requires what the mystics called surrender, what the psychologists now call detachment, what Montaigne simply called living according to your nature. To walk this path, you'll have to disappoint some people. You'll have to risk being misunderstood. You'll have to stop chasing the metrics that once defined your worth. But in exchange, you'll get something more valuable: wholeness. A life not built on performance, but on presence. Not on approval, but on inner peace. Not on proving, but on being. And that kind of life? It doesn't just look successful. It feels free. So here's your invitation, and maybe your reminder. You don't have to fix everything. You don't have to explain yourself to everyone. You don't have to prove your goodness by how much you sacrifice. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to choose peace over perfection. You are allowed to be deeply, wildly, unapologetically you, even if not everyone claps for it. Because the moment you stop living for them is the moment you begin to live for real. And in that quiet, honest space, everything falls into place. If this resonated with you, if something stirred in your chest while listening, it's not an accident. You're here because some part of you is ready to release the noise, ready to stop chasing, ready to return to something quieter, wiser, more honest. This space, our space, isn't for surface-level content. It's for the ones who want to think deeper, feel clearer, and live truer. It's for those who are tired of performing strength and ready to cultivate real resilience. For those who understand that reclaiming your power doesn't mean dominating. It means knowing yourself so well that the world can shake you. Every day we explore the deeper layers through psychology, philosophy, and the timeless wisdom of thinkers like Montaigne, Jung, Marcus Aurelius, and many others. But more than that, we reflect on how these ideas live inside us today. In our relationships, our careers, our self-doubt, our longing to grow without losing ourselves. We talk about boundaries, emotional regulation, vision, confidence, and the subtle forms of manipulation we fall into, both from others and from our own inner critic. We don't seek perfection. We seek clarity, integrity, peace. So if you on a journey to become more of who you already are, without apology or over-explanation, then this is your home. Subscribe not because you should, but because you want to belong to a space that honors your complexity, that sees your quiet strength, that encourages you to lead, not just with ambition, but with soul. Because together, we are remembering how to live from the inside out, with courage, with emotional intelligence, with purpose. And maybe that's all we ever really needed. So join us, reflect with us, grow with us. Let yes build a life where things fall into place, not because we force them to, but because we finally learned to let go.